Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast. This is episode 120, Jake Runestad live in my classroom. In this episode, filmed in front of a live studio audience in the form of my students, I have the opportunity to sit down with one of our generation's finest compositional voices, Jake Runestad. With the help of my students, we have a spirited conversation about the value and genesis of creativity, the special nature of the human voice as an instrument, the central importance of text in choral music, as well as Jake's advice for the next generation of composers and performers. In addition to those topics, we also have topics that were brought in unannounced by my students, and that was added a fun dynamic to this conversation into a little bit of a different type of episode than we have done before. This is a mixture, I guess, of me interviewing someone as well as one of these student perspectives. If you've never seen a student perspectives episode, these are episodes where I've either zoomed in or appeared in a classroom to get students' perspectives on various issues and to take their questions and to talk with them. And this is kind of a mixture of those, which I thought was really, really fun. I have enjoyed getting to know Jake over the last few years, and I know you will be just as impressed with the person behind the music as I am. So stick around, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. So we've done something big over at Patreon, and we've finally cracked over 150 members. That community just continues to grow, and I'm blown away by the support financially in order to continue to underwrite the costs of the web hosting, the advertising, the equipment, all the things that continue to be monthly expenses for creating the show. The Patreon really makes sure that those don't make it cost prohibitive for me to continue to provide these great conversations and professional development for you for free. So head over to patreon.com/choralosophy, and for as little as $3 a month, you can jump in over there and be part of that growing tribe of supporters. The producers at Patreon are Brannigan Lawrence, Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Ulrich at Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Jeff Walsh, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Something new going on at choralosophy.com that you need to know about. It is no longer just a place to click on links for a podcast. Starting this week, I am rolling out a new initiative called Choralosophy Contributors. And the first person to put herself forward was two-time guest on this show, Lori Sonnenberg, who is a speech pathologist and voice teacher, and she has created a written blog on choralosophy.com where she is going to help you think through and learn about ways that you can keep your voice healthy as a teacher. I know at this time of year, my voice is always at its most tired because allergies, because the school year is new, and I'm doing a lot of demonstrating. My voice is just shot. You could probably hear it if you listen a lot to my speaking voice right now. So this blog at choralosophy.com will be in the show notes of this episode, and you can find a link to that. And of course, subscribe there, and you'll get notified every time a new blog is posted. As always, just a reminder to use your promo code Choralosophy at checkout when you use Sight Reading Factory membership upgrades, as well as adding student memberships. Whenever you go to mymusicfolders.com to order folders or singer's masks or any other classroom supplies that you need, they have a great stash of things that you can use for your classroom, and you can get a discount there as well. And then, of course, sheet music from ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. All of those websites will give you a discount whenever you enter Choralosophy, so make sure that is part of your habit when you're shopping.
It's great to be here with all of you. Thanks for letting me be in your beautiful choir room.
Isn't it nice?
Yeah, it's lovely.
We have tons of room.
It's lovely. I was guessing there would be some sort of like a statue or shrine to you somewhere in the room, or at least to me, right? No, I'm kidding.
They tend to take those down.
Yeah, right. Good.
Once they get built. Yeah, it's probably healthy.
Yeah.
Jake Runestad, welcome.
Thank you.
Or as most choir people call you, Jake Runestad.
Right.
Why is that wrong?
Well, I suppose it's not technically wrong. So the original Norwegian is closer to Runestad, but it's become Americanized within my family. So my grandpa would say Runestad, but his cousin, who was a choir director in Nebraska, would say Runestad. And so, who knows? So my side, we just say Runestad, so that's what we go with.
Do you get offended when people say Runestad?
No. It's fine.
You should try that.
I just get offended when they say, "Hey, idiot," to me. Like that's what's.
I see. Well, let's start out with just letting you share with people who you are and why you do what you do. What's your origin story? Like you're the superhero, and tell us how you became radicalized for choral composing.
Sure. So I was born on the planet Neptune, and so I grew up in Rockford, Illinois, which is in north central Illinois, and grew up in a very musical family. Both of my parents had beautiful voices. And my grandpa, one grandpa was a singer, known as the Svenska Sinatra, the Swedish Sinatra. Had a beautiful tenor voice and sang with big bands. There was a really famous show, variety show called The Lawrence Welk Show. And apparently he was asked to be a regular on that show, but his mom didn't want him to leave home. And so he wasn't able to go on there. But beautiful voice. Choir director is uncle. Great uncle was a middle school band director. Grandma was like a pianist in a church. So lots of musicians in my family. So I grew up with music all around, and I think it's in my DNA. And so as a kid, I was in some children's choirs when I was pretty young, and we had a piano at the house. And so I was a curious little kid and go to the piano and start plunking out little melodies that I heard on the radio. And that turned into little piano pieces, and then a lot of terrible love songs in high school. And I was in a couple bands, and then I was just creating music all the time. You know, I would save up my money instead of buying the best clothes or a car, or I would buy like microphones and this amazing like digital audio recorder with a built-in CD burner and a keyboard and stuff like that. And so I was always making music. My senior year of high school, my teacher showed us this software called Sibelius, where you could actually input music and then create a score and print out all the parts and all that stuff. And so that completely captured me. And so I came to school early every day so I could work on his computer to just try out this software. So I asked if I could arrange a piece for the band, which I did, and then also decided I'd write a piece. So that was kind of my first time really creating music in that way. And went to college to be a high school band director, joined the choir my sophomore year and really loved it. So was writing all kinds of music for band, for choir, for jazz band, for some chamber stuff. And then a composer named Libby Larson came to my university. She had written a piece for the orchestra. And we didn't have a composition program, so I wasn't able to study that in college. And so the conductor of the orchestra said, Jake, you know, you're a composer, I know, would you like to meet with Libby when she's here? I was like, because she's just amazing. So Libby came to a rehearsal where the band was rehearsing one of my pieces, and we met afterwards, and she asked me a bunch of questions about my process, and then at the end said, Jake, I'd like for you to study with me, which was just a huge honor. So I had some lessons with Libby, and she really encouraged me to go to graduate school. And so I last minute applied, ended up getting into the Peabody Conservatory, got my master's there in composition, and graduated, still had no idea what to do with my life, and kept writing, and then started getting more work, more performances, more commissions, and then I was able to jump into it full time. So that's a little bit of the background.
Okay, good. So two questions that come out of your story that I think people would be interested in hearing clarified. So you said you took composing lessons. A lot of these kids that are in the audience today take maybe voice lessons or piano lessons, or that's an easy concept to understand what would happen.
Right.
But when you take a composer lesson, what does that mean?
It's kind of like therapy.
Okay.
So where, yes, there are technical elements, right? Okay, the oboes are too low on this starting note, or this texture is a little thick, or let's talk about pacing. But sometimes it's also more about the bigger ideas of how are you expressing this concept through this art form. And it's all so inaccurate, right? Like, music doesn't mean anything.
Right.
It's just sound.
Unless we make it mean something.
Right? And so, if we add words to it, that's something, and there are certain cultural ideas, like if you hear a solo trumpet play, that can evoke some sort of like a bugle playing in a military context, or different things like that. But ultimately, music doesn't mean anything, and so we have to try to create meaning through the use of these systems that we've used over hundreds of years in various musical cultures. And so it's a matter of figuring out, have I used that system in a way that is clearly communicating what it is that I hope to say with a piece, or things like that. So in a lesson, it's looking at the piece and it's saying, does this work? Does this pacing work? Is it too fast? Do we move into this new section too quickly? Are the voices covered by the orchestra in this moment? All those kinds of things.
Awesome. And then the second question that I had about your story is then you finally get to the end of your story of why you do what you do, and you say, now I'm finally a composer for a full-time living. What does that mean? What is a day in the life of Jake Runestad?
Sure. So it's a mixture of creating music in all kinds. So I write all on commission. So someone says to me, Jake, we want you to write us a piece, and I say, cool, let's do it. And then we figure out the details of that. So, it could be a 12-minute piece for tuba and piccolo, or it could be a 30-minute piece for choir and orchestra, or an 8-minute piece for wind ensemble, or whatever it might be. And then I go and write the piece, give it to them. Everyone's happy, hopefully.
And they pay you money.
And they pay me money, yep.
Yep. So how does that work? Do you have a fee structure based on how much time it's going to take you? Or is it a formula, cut and dry, plug in an equation, and this is how many dollars it costs? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a little different for every project. Ultimately, in the composer world, because it's hard to track all of the time, because our brains are always working through things. And so what we've come up with, kind of as a composer society, is a per minute of music fee. So, for example, someone could commission a piece for SATB choir, unaccompanied, between 5 and 7 minutes. And so then I would calculate out roughly a per minute fee, and every composer has a different per minute fee of completed music. But that's a kind of a helpful metric. And then, if there's an addition of piano or other instruments or orchestra or, whatever it is, then that's a different part of, like a percentage of that calculation.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Write a piece for bass and alto just humming an F natural for 3 minutes.
That's already been written.
But that's money right there. That's just automatic money. They would say that you have gotten that bag. That's awesome. Here's one thing that I think would also be interesting too is you're here, for example, in Kansas City. We're going to work with some high school choirs today. It's my understanding, and you get a chance to see your music come alive in young voices. What is that like for you to have something that lives up here, just in your head, spinning and spinning and spinning? You get it onto paper. You've done all this work to try to go to composer lessons and figure out what the big picture is, and you've got it all down on paper. And now you see it like being sung by actual live human children. What's that like?
It's what keeps me doing it.
Yeah.
It's the best feeling ever. I think especially that first time that I hear something come to life, when it's been so much a part of me for a long time, and then it's this kind of feeling of release, like, okay, now it's in the world, and it's glorious. So it feels like there's a part of me that has now been opened into the world, which is it's a really special part of that process. And then for pieces that maybe I've heard a bunch before, to then be able to work with a new group on that is really special, because every group brings something new to the music. They have their own culture, they have their own community, they have their own ideas and nuances that make it special for me to experience the piece in the context of those people. So I think every time it's a discovery.
Yeah, and it's a little bit different every time you hear it. And of course, that's one of my favorite things about the choral art form, but also live music of any kind, really, is that it's not the same every time. And so when we write music onto a score, we're not trying to create an exact replica. How do you think about that?
That's a big deal. Because I hear performances of my music that sound nice, but what I really want is for conductors to interpret. Now, that doesn't mean change notes. It doesn't mean, change rhythms. But it means, shape the piece in a way that is informed by the text, informed by the musical lines. To me, that is much more interesting than a perfect performance. I'd rather have some things out of tune than no interpretation of the piece.
Yeah, yeah, and that's always the tough line for choirs. And from our standpoint, that's the tough line to walk. Is how much time do you spend? We have X number of minutes every day
Right.
to rehearse a piece. How many minutes do we spend making it technically perfect, fixing every single wrong note, every single wrong rhythm, versus how many minutes do we allow for the discussion about the poetry or the text and understanding the story, and where do we find that balance? And I think it also depends on the piece. How much time we might spend on that. But when you go to work with a high school choir or a college choir, whatever, so you're clinicking with them and then they're working on your music, what are the types of things that you like to do with them to help them discover that? Is there a connection always to what it means to you, to what the piece means to you first?
No.
No, okay.
In fact, usually I don't share that as far as like the deepest reason that I wrote the piece.
Okay.
Because I think in some ways that doesn't allow others to find their own way into it. If I prescribe a meaning, there isn't as much freedom for individual interpretation. So I tend to not talk too much about that. I might broadly or help guide the conversation, but really when it for choral music, it all for me is through the text.
Right.
And in my process, I spend so much time choosing the text first, because I'm really picky. Not all texts can and should be set to music. And then spending a long time with that text, trying to understand, who wrote this? When did they write it? How did they write it? Why did they write it? All of those kinds of questions are crucial. If I find out that the text was scratched on the wall of a concentration camp, that changes how I approach it. Or if I find out, that this text was written by someone who really struggled with depression and ended up taking their life, that changes the way we interpret that text. Or, any number of things. It was chiseled on a tablet. It was a letter found in the gutter in New York with no name on it. All of these things inform the way that I interpret and then bring that text to music. And so I really believe that my role is not to impose my music onto a text, but to discover the music inside of the text and reveal that through the music. So for me, all the conversations really revolve around the text. Because if we don't understand what it is that we're singing about, it's going to be really hard to bring feeling and emotion and understanding to it. So that's a lot of what I do. And then also how do we create really beautiful organic musical moments in the context of understanding the words. And so a lot of that is playing with time. And this moment needs to stretch a little bit because this word is really crucial in the phrase. And a big thing for all the conductors out there is, in my music we go back and forth from duple and triple rhythms, and there are syncopations and things like that. And it's not to be difficult. It's because, a lot of what I do is setting English words, and English is not a duple language. We have a mixture of duple and triple, twos and threes and fives sometimes. And so if our music is only in duple, so 1 and 2, and it's robotic, and I think it's really hard to make it musical. So in my music, when I have triplets, and usually somewhere in the score I say, like in the opening, stretch all the triplets. And it's because, one, English is a mixture of duple and triple, and also I come from a jazz background, and in that, when you have a triplet, it's always stretched because it creates tension, and it pulls a phrase. So like on my piece, Let My Love Be Heard, I have this opening, angels where you soar, instead of angels where you soar, which feels a little bit more robotic. And sometimes what happens is we don't actually subdivide, and so we turn the triplet, if there's a tie in the first note, into more of a 16th. Angels where you soar, right? Which is just, please don't do that. Because it's crucial that we feel the stretch of the triplets because it creates tension. And music is tension and release. And if we don't create the tension, we aren't able to then have that release. So those are some of the nuanced things that I work on in rehearsals.
Yeah, we a good number of us here in the room had quite a bit of experience working on your music last year. We prepared two of your pieces, Into the Light and Proud Music of the Storm, for a performance at Carnegie Hall,
Yeah.
and we, of course, one of the super exciting things about that experience for us was getting to work through, just exactly like you said, the texts.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of some moments that just hearing Jake describe how he thinks of setting English, that just kind of jumped to my mind of how the rhythms that he chooses for the words to come across, almost it sounds like if I were to say it in a really passionate way, what rhythm would just come out.
Yeah.
Is that, do you spend time speaking through text to like out loud? Like if there was a hidden camera, would you be super embarrassed because you're just like making noises, or like does it all happen in your head?
No, it's all physical.
Okay.
It's all with the body and with the breath. And so, once I've spent a lot of time with the text and feel like I really understand it and done a lot of analysis and figure out form, metaphor, all that kind of stuff, then it's I feel like I've ingested as much information as I can. Then it's ready that I can start to create and generate material. So that process for me is improvisation. And it's sometimes at the piano, sometimes just walking around, and I'm gesturing with my hands, and I'm singing and creating phrases. So none of it has to do with notation. And I think sometimes if we go to notation too early, it gets in the way of the music itself, right? And then we end up composing for the notation instead of for the musical line.
So you might just sing something, just sing it without having a lot of
for weeks.
Yeah, sing until you like it.
That's right.
Sing random stuff until you like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Because I could have done angels where you soar up to God's own light. And it's so boring, right? For Let My Love Be Heard.
That's the correct answer in undergrad composing class.
Well, maybe. And so, yeah, it's really, again, discovering the musical phrase within the text itself instead of dictating something. And for my money, I think the music is stronger if the composer approaches it in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I would like to take it over here to any of you who might have questions about some of this, because since we're on the topic of the music anyway, does anybody want to jump in and throw in their question? Go ahead. So come over here to the mic and just introduce yourself, first names.
Hi, I'm Bryce. So within Into the Light, you implement words from a lot of different people. Specifically, Movement 3, you featured Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr., and that made that movement more impactful for me. So, what's your process of, choosing those kind of quotes? And, I don't know, what's your overall goal with all of those words combined together?
Yeah, so Into the Light is a longer piece, 17 minutes, and it was commissioned to commemorate 500 years since the Reformation, which is a complex historical moment. For some people, it was freedom, and for other people, it's complex because of the person behind that movement and things that he said about certain other kinds of people. And so I came to it from an approach of what does Reformation look like in our world today? And what I found in a lot of my research was we have so much fear in the world that causes most of the issues that we face. And so if we can work towards overcoming that fear, that could be fear of the person next to us, of our neighbor, it could be fear of something that prevents us then from acting in a way of kindness or of love. So I tried to find words that would speak to all of those things. And so those were all the texts that I spent months researching and trying to find just the right text that I could put together from a variety of sources of people from around the world. And I think Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King are important voices in all of that, along with Helen Keller. She has some texts in this, which she amazes me as an individual, and being able to do what she did and the wisdom that she shared. So for me, it's how can we bring diverse voices to this to try to speak to this issue, to this topic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In fact, Bryce, would you grab the music there and and come back and read the text for Movement 3?
Okay. do you want me to say like which ones,
Yeah.
which people? Okay, so Frederick Douglass, the ice under us is very thin and is made weak by the warm fogs of fear. And then Martin Luther King, we are driven by love or by fear. I fear you, for I do not know you. And then John the Evangelist, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear.
That's awesome. And so as you're giving that explanation of trying to find diverse voices and from around the world, different places in time, the thing that was impactful for me of that movement is that what that symbolizes to me is that those expressions of almost like the warnings about fear and how it can impact us to do other things that we wouldn't normally want to do is a human problem.
Yeah.
Because if people have been talking about this through centuries across continents, then it's a human problem. It's not a right now problem. It's something that we've always been struggling with as humans, and I thought
All
that was
species.
really yeah well yeah
All species.
for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it's, I think, our part of what we do as being human is to process, okay, when am I in fear? You've heard of the fight or flight idea, right? Which is usually triggered by fear. And so how do we respond if we are feeling threatened in some way? And that can come from a variety of different matters. But that's a really important thing.
Awesome. Any other questions? Go ahead. Come on down.
Hi, I'm Mason.
Can you talk louder?
Yeah. So for Proud Music of the Storm, that poem is like really, really long.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you chose what parts of the poem to use, because you didn't use all of it in the song.
Right.
So I'm just wondering how you chose which parts to use.
Yeah, so this is a Walt Whitman poem, Proud Music of the Storm, and like I said before, not all texts can and should be set to music. There are some that parts of them can sing well, and when Walt Whitman wrote this poem, he wasn't intending it to be set to music for people to sing, right? So there are some phrases in general that don't sing well, some words that don't sing well, and so
Say more first about what you mean by sing well.
Yeah, so for example, if a phrase has mostly consonants, that doesn't sing so well, right?
Right.
If there's no kind of arch of a phrase within the sentence, that's difficult to sing, depending on the context. There are some phrases where the meaning is so obscured that you barely get it if you read it, but if you hear it sung, that's taking it down several notches of understanding, intelligibility. And so I think it has to be incredibly clear right off the bat and usually succinct in order for it to be able to work to be understood when it's sung, especially with harmony or counterpoint or things like that.
Or an orchestra playing along.
Orchestra playing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so another thing you might notice is that if I have counterpoint, it usually happens after the phrase is stated at least once clearly, so people can hear the phrase and then introduce contrapuntal lines, because ultimately I want the text understood. So in this case of Proud Music of the Storm, I excerpted to find those phrases that I think fit well for the voice, that also were the true essence of what he was saying, kind of trimming it down to here is the core of what we can say with all of the kind of colorful imagery that he uses. And so as I just kept honing the poem, and then as I was writing, I kept honing more and more until I found, I guess, what the essence that was necessary for the musical setting.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
My name is Dylan, and in Proud Music of the Storm, there's this section of the song talking about my mother's voice and lullaby, which is followed by that whole melody of the mother's voice and talking about just the different sounds that music brings. And was there a personal connection that helped you find that melody, or I'm just curious about how you came up with that?
I wanted it to sound like a lullaby, so I think that this whole text, we start off with kind of classic Whitman, which is this, we are human, we are part of the earth, let us celebrate that. And then he moves us into this dream world where he's dreaming about all these sounds that he's heard in his life. So I thought, well, for a dream, it has to be a lullaby, right? So I came up with that lullaby idea. And then there's a counter melody, which is actually the Brahms lullaby that I fit in there, which maybe you didn't find. Da dee da 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 da. Right, so that's hidden in there. And so it was just kind of creating that kind of world. And then I have something that sounds like a music box as a part of that, with glockenspiel, and things like that. So it was just trying to evoke that world of a dream space, but also kind of a childlike simplicity to it, in thinking about what it was like to hear your mother singing lullabies to you as kind of the core image of that, and then use that as the inspiration for the whole section. So that's what I was thinking about there.
Cool. Any more music questions? You good? Okay, I'm going to take us in one more direction then. So right now, you and I were talking about this in the car on the way here. We recently all experienced a time when choir wasn't really able to function and in a normal way. And we've talked a lot here as students and in a class setting of how limiting that was. Certain periods of time where maybe over a span of 3 months where a typical choir would have gotten to experience 4 or 5 or 6 pieces of choral music during that span of time. When we were online school, maybe we had time to do 1 or 2. And even then, it wasn't even really doing it. We were just like, learning parts in our bedrooms by ourselves and all that kind of stuff. Now, as somebody who is, so we lived through it in that way as people who try to experience choir physically by doing it, and we know how much that sucked. What about you from the composer standpoint, where you've had all these idea babies, for lack of a better word, and they've been put out into the world, and just nothing. It's like the sound stops. What was that like for you?
Yeah. It was awful.
Yeah.
It was awful. Part of that is, there's so many parts to it. One being, I work for myself, and so it's not like I go to a job every day or a school every day, and so there was no built-in community, other than friends and family and that kind of thing. And I did a lot of virtual, interviews and conversations with different groups, but it's not the same. And so, when I'm traveling like this is when I'm getting that fill of being in a community and making music with people. So to have none of that was really, really hard. To have pieces that were completed and ready to have its first performance that was delayed and we had no idea when that was going to happen. Again, that feels like part of me that I'm just, it's sitting inside and I can't let it out. So there's some of that. And then also, not knowing when, new commissions were going to come in because we didn't know when things were going to open up again. And then also, I think a big one for me was, and I think a lot of us went through these kind of really important introspective states. The question was, when Jake has his music taken away from him, and he's not Jake the composer, who is he? So I think there was a big reckoning with that question. It's so easy for us as artists to throw our entire identity into our art form because we get a lot of meaning from it. And it is true that it's an incredible way to live. And, making music, having concerts, the community that we find in choir and orchestra and band and all of these musical ways is some of the most profound and meaningful that's possible, I think. But if we throw all of our life's meaning into that, and then, if you have any sort of setback, then you feel that personally instead of it just being, well, that's the music. Right? And instead of thinking, oh, that's Jake. So I think it was a big moment of growth for me in thinking about, well, Jake is more than just Jake the composer and conductor. Jake is a brother and an uncle and a son and a friend and all of these things. So yeah, it was a difficult time. But I think for a lot of us, it helped us realize things that hopefully we now take into life now. And so yeah, I'm grateful for it, but also, of course, it was terrible for our art form.
Right. Yeah, I think about that a lot too, in terms of that idea of having your identity taken away. When, for me, being a teacher is a big part of my identity, and during that time, that was taken away too, in the sense that like I can't. I want to be the person who comes into the classroom and makes eye contact with a kid and asks them how their day's going, or tells them a joke, which they love. During that time, like who am I right now? Like I can't be that teacher, and that's that. And I sometimes I wonder about, from the teenage perspective too, how much. My theory is that was actually harder on these kids than it was on us, because we've already figured out who we are in some sense. So it's almost like the metaphor is, let's say you're thrown into the ocean, out in the middle of the water. But you know that just a few feet away there's a buoy you could hang on to. Well, that's in a lot of cases how adults felt during the pandemic, because we were floating in the ocean. It's scary, but we know that we could swim to that buoy. But if in some cases, if you've never had the buoy ever in your life, and you're just floating there in the ocean, that's like, oh no, I could drown. And so I think that's something that I think about a lot too. I like to ask people that question, because I tend to get that type of answer every time I ask it, which is that I lost my sense of identity during that time.
Yeah.
It's almost what every person says.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, again, it's kind of like the Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King quote. If I hear that many people say stuff like that, then that might be a human thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept. Okay, so I want to check, because we're going to get, we have about 9 minutes before this class period ends. So I would like to have, if possible, in our last few minutes, for Jake, to get some of the same treatment that we get when we're trying to get to know each other. So let's finish with kind of a rapid fire question round, where you get to ask Jake any types of questions that you want. Okay. And if you have one, I want you to think of it. Everybody take about 15 seconds. And if you have one, then you need to get up quietly and walk around over here and line up. Don't be scared.
Let's go.
And you guys can too, by the way. Yeah. Just because I have to have it, recorded. What's up? It doesn't have to be a goofy. It doesn't have to be a goofy question. Okay, let's go.
Okay, I'm Jane. So my question is, when you're coming up with melodies and stuff for songs, does that come from all different places, or do you have stuff in your head, or do you have to intentionally work it out? Where does that come from?
It's a lot of play, and I think that's what's so important about the creative process. Is it's not like I sit down and say, okay, this is the melody, boom, there it is. It's about just play, and I think in many ways, the older we get, the more play is kind of dictated by our culture, saying, nope, you're not supposed to do that. Like when we're in kindergarten, we're all actors and dancers and painters and composers and singers and everything else. Then what happens? Why is that taken away from us? I think it's terrible. And so for me, it's all about play. And so I'm just, of course, my music is informed by everything I've ever heard and seen and touched and smelled and read and all those things. Right. And so I have this encyclopedia of senses in my brain, that when I create something, it's filtered through all of that. And so it's a lot of just playing around and finding something that, until it feels right in that moment.
That's awesome.
Hello, my name is Addie, and I was wondering, what movie do you think has the best score?
That's a good question.
That's really difficult. There are so many extraordinary scores. My brain jumped to just a single composer, John Williams, because he really brought so much to the idea of thematic development. And I know many composers have done that in history, but he's done it so well. If you think about Star Wars, right, you immediately think about the music and how each character relates to their own music, because it's so iconic and it's treated so profoundly within the movie itself, right? If Darth Vader's about to be coming, you slowly kind of hear little bits of that theme until he shows up. So I think I've got to say John Williams in general as a composer.
That's awesome.
How have you dealt with like difficulties throughout your career? Like, what's your mindset?
Setbacks, you mean?
Yeah, setbacks and difficulties.
You know, I think that's the nature of being an artist, is to deal with setbacks, and it really comes with the territory. You know, and being a composer, you have to really put yourself out there, right? This is music, very personal music that I'm creating, that I then launch into the world and have no idea how it's going to be received. Are people going to like it? Are they going to hate it? Are they going to find it mediocre? Are they going to want to perform it or not? And so I have to just keep putting myself out there. And I think that takes a lot of guts to be able to do that, but also an understanding that, you know, again, trying to separate myself from that, so that if a piece, you know, goes well, that, you know, that's not necessarily I'm a better person now, right? Or vice versa. And so I think it's just understanding the context of it and saying, okay, I am more than my successes or my failures, and I just have to keep my head down and keep doing the work.
Great.
Hi, my name's Addie. I was wondering, like, what your favorite, like, type of piece to compose is.
I don't have a favorite. I like variety, though. You know, if I had to write 5-minute choral pieces for the rest of my life, I would get really bored. So I like being able to write for one ensemble, an orchestra, an opera, and longer choral works with the orchestra, or shorter things. And so I think for me, variety is great. But I do love working with text and voices.
Hi, my name's Cadence. I was wondering if you had a chance to give advice to any, like, just now starting composers, what would be, like, the perfect advice you would give them?
The perfect.
No flaws.
Oh, jeez.
No pressure. No pressure.
No pressure. So you can't learn to be creative. You can learn theory, technique, harmony, orchestration, but you can't learn how to generate ideas. That comes from you. So my best advice is to go into a room where you can be alone and no one can hear you, and to bring whatever instrument is most comfortable, if that's your voice, if that's guitar, piano, whatever it might be, and make sounds. And those can be weird sounds, they can be beautiful sounds, they can be short sounds, long sounds, any kinds of sounds, right? Don't worry about capturing them. Don't worry about judging them, but just create. And do that all the time, over and over and over and over again, without needing it to be anything, right? I think the problem comes when, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a piece. Go! And then it's like, what do I write? You know? So it's Ben Folds, who's one of my favorite artists, has this memoir, and in it he talks about the creative process. And he says that it's kind of like if you walk into a house where the water hasn't been turned on in a while, and you turn on the faucet, and it runs kind of rusty brown, right, for a while, and then eventually, after time, it'll run clean. That's kind of like this. So if we just sit down and expect to start writing, you know, have we even turned on the faucet? And at that point, you know, if we do get the faucet on, it's going to run brown. And so create, whatever kind of thing. And then maybe at some point, you might want to capture it. And maybe that's in voice memos on your phone, which I do a lot. And then at some point, maybe, oh, I really like this idea. So maybe you record that one specifically. And then once you hear that recording, you learn how you might notate that into music. But I think always music should be followed by notation. You know, I don't write anything down for weeks into my process because I think the notation gets in the way. So again, practicing just like you have to practice anything else. You know, training for a marathon, training for a soccer game, you know, working on your basketball shot, working on your vocal technique, your instrument. All of these things you have to practice and do them a lot so that you feel more comfortable with them. So for me, creativity has to be practiced, and you have to engage in it over and over and over again.
Awesome.
Thank you.
The bell is about to ring, so when it does, we'll pause for a second, people who need to get up and just quietly walk out, and we'll just let people who have time continue to ask their questions, okay?
Hi, I'm Emma. Has there ever been a song that you've composed that just altered your view of life or point of view on a specific topic, and how does that happen?
That is such a great question. And yes, there has been. So most recently, I wrote my first symphony, which is called Earth Symphony, and it's for choir and orchestra, extended work. And it's an original text by the poet Todd Boss, who I work with a lot. He wrote the text for A Silence Haunts Me, which was the ACDA Brock Commission in 2019, and several other pieces we've written together. And this piece is my attempt at addressing human relationship with the earth and how it's such a problematic relationship, and it's a very selfish relationship. And so Todd's text is the voice of Mother Earth. And in this case, we're imagining that the human species has become extinct. And Mother Earth is telling our story of our evolution to where we are today, and then to the point of where we just kept going and ended up, doing enough damage that it was no longer sustainable for us to live as a species. And as a part of my own research and discovery through writing this piece, it really shifted my worldview. It helped me to understand us more as a species and not, some special set of beings that were placed here for a specific reason. And I think that it has helped me to be more aware of how we are treating this planet, how we're treating each other, how we are a mere blip in this timeline of the Earth's existence, and both how important that is and how unimportant we are, if that makes sense. And so I've just had a lot of revelations about myself, about our culture. And also, I read a book called Sapiens, which looks at the human species.
Harari's book.
Harari.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Looks at the human species as a species, right? As if we were studying dogs or insects. And I think that's a really important perspective. So now I look at our weird cultural traditions and like all of them, right? And say, well, that's a weird thing for a species to do. We have this kind of celebration for this thing, and we do this in order to symbolize this and to celebrate this. And, it's like, some being, every time, that there's this revolution, once a year, this being is given things on one day, like for their birthday, remembering the day that they emerged from their mother's womb. Like, what a weird thing that is when we really think about it, right? So that's one small example, but just thinking more broadly and deeply about our human traditions, about how we function as a species, and what we can do to try to improve the way that we're living so that the Earth becomes healthier again.
That's awesome.
Hi, I'm Alyssa.
Come closer to the mic.
I was just wondering, how you separate doing what you love from making it like a job that you have money from. Like, how do you keep the passion going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great question because that is a real struggle for a lot of artists. And for me, it's making sure that I participate in a lot of things outside of the art itself. So that's hanging out with friends, that's going to museums and dance performances and theater performances and, taking in lots of other kinds of art that aren't part of my art form, reading a lot, hiking, exercising, all of these things, putting good food into my body, all of that is part of it. Also making sure that I'm really careful with my schedule so that I don't overcommit to commissions and then just burn out from having to write piece after piece after piece after piece. And so for me, it's really managing the schedule, making sure that I'm taking care of my mental and physical health, and making sure that I'm experiencing other things that can then inform and inspire the art that I create.
Awesome.
And my question is, what helps you create your music?
Deadlines.
Yeah?
It's really true, right? If I have a deadline, then I know, okay, I need to finish it then. So if I go back from that, okay, so then maybe I give myself 2 months to create a short piece. And so having that deadline forces me to make decisions about the creative work. Otherwise, I could say, well, I could do this, or oh, maybe I'll go this direction. So the deadline really helps me to make decisions so that I can move forward on a piece.
Great.
Hi, my name is Holly, and I was just wondering, you spoke a little bit about how when you were younger, you would have always been curious about music and you always wanted to create, but was there ever a time when you were like going through that process of becoming a composer where you thought, this isn't for me, like this isn't what I'm supposed to do?
Never.
You're so lucky.
Once. Well, not necessarily. Yes, music was always I knew, but I didn't know what that would look like, right? So I got a degree in music education, instrumental music education, to be a high school band director, and realized that I didn't want to do that and be in the classroom every day. And so I went to grad school to study composition, finished that degree, and wasn't sure how sustainable that was. I had also started conducting choirs at that point, and so I was thinking, well, do I go back for a master's in choral conducting, or what direction do I go? And then I kept following where my strengths are, and then started to get more work in those directions. So that from commissions, from music sales, and then being brought in residence to clinic, my own music, but then also as a guest conductor. And so then my path just kind of became clear because I was following where I was getting those kinds of opportunities. And if a door was open, I was walking through that door. I wasn't standing back, looking through the door and saying, I wonder what it's on the other side there. But if there's an opportunity that I take advantage of that opportunity. So yes, there was a lot of questioning in there, but for me it was always that direction of music.
That's awesome.
Hi, I'm Piper. So I was just wondering, how you create, your melodies or your lyrics. Are they from, sentimental, personal, experiences, other people's experiences? How do you just, figure it out?
So I don't usually write my own lyrics. I usually find them from a poem, a quote, a letter, lots of different sources. And if I'm choosing the theme for a new piece, usually it relates to something that's going on in the world or in my life, or that I think is something important to talk about. And so, once I decide, or it could be, I read something in a news article, or I see, a YouTube video and it inspires something, or I go to a museum and I see something and that inspires something. So it's usually always something in kind of contemporary culture that I'm grabbing onto, and then find a text that fits that, and then find a melody again that goes with that text.
Great.
Hi, I'm Will. I was wondering, what's been your favorite or a more enjoyable process of creating a song?
Do you have any favorite children, Jake?
No, no favorite children. I think that I've had some really special collaborations with Todd Boss, the poet that I work with a lot, who's a dear friend of mine, and we have a really special and trusting collaborative relationship. So we're really able to go back and forth and trust each other for what we do. Him as writing words, me as writing music. And there's something that I need that I'll ask him, actually, I think that it needs to go here, or can you write the text so it fits this specific meter, because this is what the music needs. Or he might say, in this moment we really need this word because, or this gesture, this, gesture of phrase, because it's needed in the text. So we're able to kind of talk really frankly with each other about it, which is nice. And we know that it's not hurting each other's feelings. And so also what that does is it makes the final piece of art greater than the sum of its parts. So those collaborations are really special.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Alara, and I actually, I think about this a lot because of Mr. Munns. I know his answer to this, but what is your favorite musical instrument and why?
Oh, that's so difficult. I'm really bad with favorites. I mean, I think the voice is extraordinary because it's so versatile, and it communicates with words, which is clearer. Sometimes, it can be more immediate.
If we're doing it right.
Can be more immediate, communicating with words. But, if you hear a cello play a gorgeous line, like that can hit you in ways that words can't. And so I think it's difficult to choose. I mean, I love the both of those. I love piano. I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Jake. This was fun.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you getting a chance to kind of talk through your process, and I love that my students got a chance to see that as well. So I really appreciate you coming all the way out to the burbs to do this with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Oh, you're too kind.
I know, isn't that right?
Thank you all for sticking around to the end of an episode. I appreciate those of you who listen, and I hope that you found this episode to be interesting and engaging and a little bit new and a little bit fresh. And of course, anytime I do these live episodes, you're going to see this little live logo on the materials that get published, and that is a good indicator that the video version of this show is a fun one to watch because there's actual people in the room, which creates a different dynamic and I think makes the conversation even that much more human. And that is the goal here, to have real human, high quality conversations that people just know it's just the real people. We're not putting on shows here. This is just real people having a conversation about the art form that we love and about the issues that matter to us. So thank you all for sticking around, and don't forget to enter your Choralosophy checkout code at the sponsors' websites that I listed earlier and that are in the show notes. You can click links, and then of course like, share, and spread this podcast around. Tell your friends, tell all of the people that you know about the Choralosophy podcast. It helps me out a lot. Thanks everybody. Bye.